Elena Hart stood in the marble lobby of her husband's headquarters, clutching a homemade lunch, while a receptionist smiled politely and delivered words that shattered 7 years of marriage. "If you'd like to see Mr. Volkov, you'll need to schedule an appointment." She needed an appointment to see her own husband. The wife of Chicago's most feared mafia boss had become so invisible that even his own staff didn't recognize her importance. That lunchbox would stay unopened. Those divorce papers would be signed. And Adrian Volkov, the man who controlled an empire, was about to lose the only thing that ever truly mattered. If you're ready to see what happens when a powerful man realizes he's lost everything, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning light that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse should have been beautiful. It painted the polished marble floors in shades of amber and gold, touched the edges of expensive furniture that Elena Hart had carefully chosen years ago, and illuminated a space that most people would call a dream home. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by that golden light, and felt absolutely nothing. She had woken at 5:30, the way she did every morning, not because she was a morning person, she had never been one, but because it was the only time she could still catch glimpses of the man she had married. Adrian Volkov typically left the penthouse before sunrise, his phone already pressed to his ear, his mind already consumed by whatever deal or territory dispute or power play awaited him in the city below. This morning had been no different. Elena had heard him moving through the bedroom in the dark, the familiar sounds of his morning routine a backdrop to her pretended sleep. She had kept her eyes closed, her breathing even, because she had learned years ago that trying to talk to Adrian before he left only resulted in distracted half-responses and the familiar phrase, "We'll talk tonight, Malishka." Except they never did. Tonight would turn into tomorrow. Tomorrow would become next week. And next week would dissolve into the same endless cycle of absence and silence that had slowly consumed their marriage like rust eating through metal. The coffee maker beeped, pulling Elena from her thoughts. She poured herself a cup and carried it to the windows, looking out over Chicago's skyline. The city sprawled before her in all its morning glory, a kingdom that her husband ruled from the shadows, an empire built on fear and loyalty and carefully controlled violence. 7 years ago, Elena had known exactly who Adrian Volkov was. She hadn't been naive. She had understood that the charming man who courted her with poetry and old vinyl records also operated in a world most people only glimpsed in movies. But back then, Adrian had promised her something that seemed impossible for a man in his position. Balance. "I will never let that world touch you," he had said, holding her hands in his on a cool autumn evening in Millennium Park. "You will always be separate from it, sacred." And for the first 2 years of their marriage, he had kept that promise. Adrian had come home for dinner. He had taken her to galleries and concerts. He had remembered the small things, her favorite flowers, the way she liked her coffee, the fact that she couldn't sleep if he didn't kiss her forehead before bed. Then everything changed. Marcus Volkov, Adrian's father and the previous head of the family, had died suddenly of a heart attack. Adrian had inherited not just his father's position, but also his wars, his debts, his enemies, and his obligations. Overnight, the man Elena loved had transformed into someone she barely recognized. The change hadn't been immediate. It had crept in slowly, like winter stealing warmth from the air. Late nights became all-nighters. Date nights became canceled plans. Conversations became logistics. And gradually, invisibly, Elena had stopped being Adrian's wife and started being simply another detail in his complicated life. Something to be maintained but never prioritized. She took a sip of her coffee and glanced at the calendar on her phone. October 14th, their 7th wedding anniversary. Elena had stopped expecting Adrian to remember 3 years ago, after the 5th anniversary had passed without acknowledgement. But some stubborn part of her, the part that still remembered who they had been, had decided to try one more time. She had made his favorite breakfast, blini with sour cream and smoked salmon, exactly the way his grandmother used to make them. She had bought him a gift, a first edition of Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, because Adrian had once told her it was the book that made him understand the complexity of loyalty and betrayal. She had even written him a card, something she hadn't done in years, trying to find words that expressed both her love and her loneliness. All of it sat on the dining table, carefully arranged, waiting for a man who had already left. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from her friend Sarah. "Happy anniversary. Any special plans?" Elena stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Thank you. Nothing special." She didn't mention that she had spent the previous week researching divorce attorneys. She didn't mention that she had already scheduled a consultation for next Tuesday with Margaret Chen, a lawyer who specialized in high-profile separations. She didn't mention that she had been collecting financial documents, taking screenshots of accounts, and slowly preparing for a reality that felt both terrifying and inevitable, because Elena had finally accepted a truth she had been avoiding for years. She loved Adrian Volkov, but love without presence was just a memory, and she couldn't keep living inside a memory. The sound of the penthouse door opening made her heart jump. For one impossible moment, she thought Adrian had come back, that maybe he had remembered, that maybe this would be the day everything changed. But it was just Katya, their housekeeper, arriving for her shift. "Good morning, Mrs. Volkov," Katya said warmly, setting down her bag. Then she noticed the untouched breakfast on the table, and her expression softened with understanding. "He left early again?" Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Katya walked over and gently squeezed her shoulder. The older woman had worked for the Volkov family for 20 years. She had seen marriages rise and fall, had watched power consume good men, had witnessed the cost of the life they all lived. "You are too good for this loneliness," Katya said quietly in her accented English. "Even a queen deserves to be seen." The words hit Elena harder than she expected. She blinked back tears and managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, Katya. Really." But they both knew it was a lie. Elena spent the rest of the morning trying to distract herself. She responded to emails. She scrolled through social media. She considered calling her sister in Boston, but decided against it. Rachel had already expressed her concerns about the marriage too many times, and Elena wasn't ready for another "I told you so" conversation. By noon, Elena had made a decision. She would try one more time. Not a grand gesture or an emotional confrontation, but something simple and concrete. She would go to Adrian's office, bring him lunch, and ask him directly if he even remembered what day it was. And if he didn't, if he looked at her with that distracted expression and apologized while already moving on to the next crisis, then she would know for certain that it was time to let go. Elena changed into a simple but elegant dress, navy blue, Adrian's favorite color, and carefully packed his lunch into an insulated bag. She included the blini from breakfast, still perfectly preserved, along with a thermos of the Georgian tea he preferred and a slice of honey cake from the Russian bakery he loved. The drive to Adrian's headquarters took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Elena had only been to the building a handful of times over the years. Adrian had always preferred to keep his professional life completely separate from their home, as if creating that physical distance could somehow protect her from the reality of what he did. The building itself was unassuming, a sleek glass tower in the financial district that housed Volkov Security Solutions on the top 3 floors. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a legitimate private security firm. And technically, it was. But Elena knew that the real business, the territory management, the enforcement, the negotiations with other families, happened behind closed doors and encrypted communications. She parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to the 32nd floor, her heart beating faster with each passing floor. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like any high-end corporate office. Marble floors, minimalist furniture, abstract art on the walls. The only hint of anything unusual was the presence of 2 men in dark suits standing near the entrance, their eyes tracking every movement with professional precision. Elena approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfect hair and a polished smile looked up from her computer. "Good afternoon," the receptionist said pleasantly. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Adrian Volkov," Elena said, trying to sound confident despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. The receptionist's smile remained fixed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm sorry," the receptionist interrupted gently, her tone professional but firm. "Mr. Volkov is in meetings all day. If you'd like to see him, I can schedule something for next week. Shall I check his calendar?" Elena stared at her, the words not quite processing at first. An appointment. To see her own husband. "I'm his wife," Elena said quietly. The receptionist's expression flickered, surprise, then embarrassment, then a carefully neutral professionalism. "Oh, Mrs. Volkov, I apologize. We don't have your photo on file and I've only been here a few months, so I didn't recognize—" "It's fine," Elena said, though it wasn't fine at all. The fact that the receptionist didn't recognize her, that there was no photo of her in the system, that she was treated like any other visitor seeking an audience with the powerful Adrian Volkov, it all confirmed everything she had been feeling. She had become invisible even in her husband's own building. "Let me call up to his assistant," the receptionist said quickly, reaching for the phone. Elena stood there, clutching the lunch bag, feeling the eyes of the security guards on her. One of them, an older man with gray at his temples, stepped forward. "Mrs. Volkov," he said respectfully, and there was recognition in his eyes. "I remember you. From the holiday party 2 years ago. You wore a red dress." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. "Thank you," Elena managed. The receptionist spoke quietly into the phone, then looked up. "Mrs. Volkov, I'm so sorry, but Mr. Volkov is currently in a meeting with the senior partners, and his assistant says it's expected to run for at least another 3 hours. She asks if you'd like to leave a message, or if you could come back." "No," Elena said softly. "No message." She set the lunch bag on the reception desk with careful precision, as if it were something fragile that might shatter. "Could you please make sure he gets this?" she asked. "Of course," the receptionist said, relief flooding her voice. Elena turned and walked back to the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble with a hollow sound that seemed to echo through the empty lobby. She felt the security guard's sympathetic gaze on her back. She felt the receptionist's uncomfortable pity. She felt the weight of 7 years of silence pressing down on her shoulders. The elevator doors closed, and Elena saw her own reflection in the polished steel. She looked like a stranger. When had she become this woman? When had she learned to smile through loneliness, to accept absence as normal, to shrink herself so small that even the people who worked for her husband didn't recognize her face? By the time Elena reached her car, tears were streaming down her face. She sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not quiet, dignified tears, but raw, broken sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the girl who had believed in love. She cried for the marriage that had slowly died while she pretended not to notice. She cried for the life she had built in her imagination, the one where Adrian came home and actually saw her, where anniversaries mattered, where she was more than just a beautiful accessory in a powerful man's carefully controlled world. When the tears finally stopped, Elena felt something shift inside her. Clarity. She had tried. She had been patient. She had given Adrian every opportunity to choose her, to fight for them, to prove that she mattered more than his empire. And he had failed, not through malice, but through neglect, which somehow hurt even more. Elena drove home in silence, her mind already moving through logistics. The consultation with Margaret Chen was in 4 days. She would need to gather more documentation. She would need to open her own bank account, something separate from the joint finances Adrian controlled. She would need to find an apartment, somewhere small and quiet, where she could figure out who Elena Hart was without Adrian Volkov. The thought terrified her, but staying terrified her more. That evening, Elena waited for Adrian to come home. She had changed out of the navy dress and into comfortable clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater. She had made dinner, more out of habit than hope. And she had rehearsed what she would say, the words she had been holding inside for far too long. Adrian arrived just after midnight. Elena heard his key in the lock, heard his heavy footsteps in the foyer, heard him sigh as he set down his briefcase and phone. "Elena?" he called out, his accent thickening the way it always did when he was exhausted. "You're still awake?" She found him in the living room, loosening his tie and pouring himself a drink. He looked tired, lines around his eyes she didn't remember, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. For a moment, she felt a pang of sympathy. Then she remembered the receptionist's polite suggestion that she make an appointment. "We need to talk," Elena said. Adrian glanced at her, then at his watch. "Malishka, it's late. Can it wait until—" "No," Elena said firmly. "It can't wait." Something in her tone must have gotten through to him because Adrian actually looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his glass. "Do you know what day it is?" Elena asked. Adrian frowned, clearly running through his mental calendar. She watched him search his memory, saw the exact moment he realized, saw the guilt flash across his face. Fuck, he breathed. The anniversary. Elena, I'm so sorry. I went to your office today, Elena said, cutting off his apology. I brought you lunch. Your favorite. I wanted to surprise you. Adrian's expression shifted to confusion. I didn't know you were... My assistant didn't tell me. Your receptionist didn't recognize me, Adrian. She told me I needed to schedule an appointment if I wanted to see you. An appointment. To see my own husband. The words hung in the air between them. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from years of marriage. It meant he was trying to find the right words, trying to fix something he didn't fully understand. That's unacceptable, he said finally. I'll make sure every person in that building knows who you are. I'll have your photo. That's not the point, Elena said, and her voice cracked despite her best efforts to stay calm. The point is that I've become so invisible in your life that the people who work for you don't even know I exist. The point is that you forgot our anniversary. Again, the point is that I can't remember the last time we had a real conversation, the last time you asked me about my day, the last time you looked at me like I was someone who mattered. Adrian stepped toward her, his expression pained. You matter. Of course you matter. You're my wife. You're everything to me. Am I? Elena asked softly. Because it doesn't feel that way, Adrian. It feels like I'm just here, like I'm part of the furniture, something you come home to but never really see. That's not true. When's my birthday? Elena asked suddenly. Adrian blinked. What? My birthday. When is it? She watched him struggle, saw him mentally calculating, and felt her heart break a little more. April 20th? He said, uncertainty clear in his voice. 22nd, Elena said quietly. It's April 22nd. You missed it by 2 days. The silence that followed was deafening. What's my favorite book? Elena continued, her voice getting stronger. What do I do on Thursday afternoons? What's the name of my best friend from college? What am I afraid of? What makes me happy? When's the last time you asked me any of these things? Adrian stood frozen, and Elena could see the realization dawning in his eyes. You don't know, do you? She said. Because you stopped paying attention. You stopped seeing me. And I let it happen. I stayed quiet and patient and understanding, thinking that if I just waited long enough, you'd come back to me. But you never did. Elena, please. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. Just tell me what you need. I'll fix this. Whatever it takes. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision she had made in that underground parking garage. I've filed for divorce, she said. The color drained from Adrian's face. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Elena saw fear in his eyes. Real, visceral fear. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. I met with a lawyer last week, Elena said, and now that she had started, the words came easier. I'm filing for divorce. The papers will be ready next week. No. Adrian shook his head, moving toward her. No, Elena, you don't mean that. You're upset, and you have every right to be, but we can fix this. I can fix this. How? Elena asked, and there was no anger in her voice anymore, just exhaustion. How are you going to fix 7 years of neglect, Adrian? How are you going to fix the fact that I've spent more nights alone than with you? That I've celebrated birthdays and holidays and anniversaries by myself while you built your empire? I was doing it for us, Adrian said desperately. Everything I do is for us. To give you this life, this security. I don't want this life. The words burst out of Elena with more force than she intended. I never wanted the penthouse or the cars or the expensive furniture. I wanted you, Adrian, just you. The man who used to read me poetry in Russian. The man who would drive across the city at midnight to bring me soup when I was sick. The man who promised me that I would always matter more than power. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't try to hide them. That man is gone, she said softly, and I can't keep living with his ghost. Adrian reached for her, but Elena stepped back. Please don't, she whispered. I can't. I need you to let me go. I can't. Adrian's voice broke. Elena, I can't lose you. You're the only real thing in my life, The only thing that matters. Without you, all of this. He gestured around them, encompassing the penthouse, the empire, everything. It means nothing. Then why didn't you fight for me when you still had me? Elena asked. Why does it take divorce papers for you to finally see me? Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came out. They stood there in the silence of the penthouse, two people who had loved each other completely, now separated by years of missed moments and forgotten promises. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight, Elena said finally. And tomorrow, I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. I need space to think. How long? Adrian asked hoarsely. I don't know. Can I call you? Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man she had fallen in love with buried somewhere beneath the layers of power and responsibility and carefully maintained control. I need time, Adrian, she said gently. I need to figure out who I am without you. I need to remember what it feels like to matter to someone. She turned to leave, but Adrian's voice stopped her. One day, he said. Elena looked back. Give me one day, Adrian said, and there was raw desperation in his eyes. One day to show you that I can change, that I can be the man you need. Please, Elena. If after that day you still want to leave, I won't fight the divorce. I'll sign whatever papers you want. But give me one chance to prove that I haven't forgotten how to choose you. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to tell him that one day couldn't fix 7 years. But something in his expression, the vulnerability she hadn't seen since they were young and poor and building a life together, made her hesitate. One day, she heard herself say. That's all, Adrian. Relief flooded his face, followed immediately by determination. That's all I need, he said. I promise you, Elena. Tomorrow I'm going to show you that you still matter, that you've always mattered. Elena nodded, too emotionally exhausted to say anything else. She walked to the guest room and closed the door behind her, leaning against it as she tried to process everything that had just happened. Part of her wanted to take back the offer, to tell Adrian that one day was pointless, that some things couldn't be fixed. But another part, the part that still remembered who they had been, wanted desperately to believe that maybe, just maybe, the man she had fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. That maybe tomorrow would prove her wrong about everything. She didn't let herself hope too much. Hope, she had learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. But as she lay in the unfamiliar guest room bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of Adrian moving through the penthouse, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. And uncertainty, she realized, was better than the numb resignation she had been living with. Tomorrow would either confirm that their marriage was truly over, or it would be the first step toward something neither of them could predict. Either way, Elena thought, as sleep finally claimed her, at least she would know for certain. And knowing, after years of existing in limbo, felt like a gift all its own. Elena woke to the smell of something burning. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't place where she was. The guest room was unfamiliar in the morning light, too sterile, too impersonal, lacking all the small touches that made the master bedroom feel like hers. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and with them, the hollow ache that had settled in her chest. She checked her phone, 6:15 in the morning. The smell of smoke was getting stronger. Elena pulled on a robe and opened the door, half expecting to find the penthouse in chaos. Instead, she found Adrian Volkov, one of Chicago's most feared crime bosses, standing in their kitchen surrounded by a disaster of flour, eggshells, and what appeared to be the charred remains of several pancakes. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, his feet bare, his hair disheveled in a way she hadn't seen in years. No suit, no phone pressed to his ear, no aura of dangerous authority that usually surrounded him like armor. He looked almost human. "What are you doing?" Elena asked, her voice still rough with sleep. Adrian spun around and she saw genuine panic cross his face when he noticed the smoke detector starting to blink red. "Shit," he muttered, grabbing a kitchen towel and waving it frantically under the detector. "I was trying to make breakfast. Your breakfast. The way I used to." Elena leaned against the doorframe, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and something dangerously close to amusement. "You're burning the penthouse down." "I'm not burning it down," Adrian said defensively, though the evidence suggested otherwise. "I'm just out of practice." He finally managed to silence the smoke detector and turned back to face her, looking sheepish in a way that reminded Elena painfully of the young man she had fallen in love with. Back when they were poor and ambitious and making terrible meals together in a cramped apartment that barely had room for a bed, let alone a kitchen. "When's the last time you cooked anything?" Elena asked quietly. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. 7 years ago, maybe longer. The admission hung between them. 7 years. The entire length of their marriage, he had been so consumed by building his empire that he had forgotten how to do the simple things, the human things. "I called in sick," Adrian said suddenly, his Russian accent thicker than usual, another tell that he was nervous. "To my own organization. I told Dmitri that all meetings are canceled today and that I'm not to be disturbed unless someone is literally dying." Elena stared at him. "You did what?" "I promised you one day," Adrian said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "One day to prove I can change. So today, I'm not Adrian Volkov, head of the Volkov family. I'm just Adrian, your husband. If you'll still let me try." Elena felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. She wanted to stay angry, to maintain the distance she had fought so hard to create, but the sight of him standing there in their destroyed kitchen, looking vulnerable and determined and terrified all at once, made it impossible. "You really called in sick," she said again, still processing. "I really did." Adrian gestured at the ruined pancakes. "And I really tried to make you breakfast. It didn't go well." Despite everything, Elena felt a small smile tug at her lips. "No, it didn't." "Will you let me try again?" Adrian asked. "Not the pancakes, the day. Us. Will you give me this chance, Elena?" She should have said no. She should have packed her bag and left for Rachel's house in Boston, put distance between herself and the hope that was starting to take root in her chest against her better judgment. But instead she heard herself say, "What did you have in mind?" Relief flooded Adrian's face, so powerful and genuine that it almost hurt to witness. "Trust me," he said softly. "Just for today, please." Elena nodded slowly, and Adrian's entire body seemed to relax. "Get dressed," he said. "Something comfortable. We're leaving in 30 minutes. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we should have gone back to a long time ago." 25 minutes later, Elena found herself in the passenger seat of Adrian's personal car, not the armored SUV he usually traveled in, not the town car with the driver, but the old Audi he had bought when they first got married and barely used anymore. It still had her favorite coffee cup in the holder, still had the CD of Russian folk songs they used to listen to on long drives. Adrian drove in silence through the morning traffic, heading south out of the downtown core. Elena watched the familiar streets pass by, recognizing the route with a jolt of surprise. "We're going to Bridgeport," she said. Adrian glanced at her, a slight smile touching his lips. "You remember." How could she forget? Bridgeport was the neighborhood where their story had begun, where they had lived in a tiny apartment above a Polish bakery, where Adrian had worked security at a warehouse while quietly building connections in his father's world, where Elena had finished her degree and dreamed of a future that felt both terrifying and limitless. They had been poor. They had eaten ramen more nights than not. They had shared one bathroom with a temperamental shower and a bedroom so small that they could barely fit a full-sized bed. And they had been happy. The neighborhood looked different now. Gentrification had crept in over the years. New coffee shops replacing old diners, boutique stores where there used to be check-cashing places. But the bones of it remained the same. The Catholic church on the corner with its fading paint. The park where families gathered on weekends. The streets where Elena had learned to navigate a city that had once felt impossibly large. Adrian parked on a side street and turned off the engine. For a moment, they both just sat there, surrounded by ghosts of who they used to be. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here?" Adrian asked quietly. Elena nodded. "You were embarrassed. You kept apologizing for the apartment, for the neighborhood, for not being able to give me more." "You told me you didn't need more," Adrian said, and there was something raw in his voice. "You said you just needed me." "I meant it." "I know." Adrian turned to look at her fully. "I spent 7 years trying to give you everything except the one thing you actually wanted. And I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so fucking sorry." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Show me," she said. "Don't tell me. Show me." Adrian nodded and got out of the car, coming around to open her door. A small gesture, but one he hadn't done in years. Elena took his offered hand and let him help her out. They walked through the neighborhood together, and with each step, Elena felt time folding in on itself. The coffee shop that used to be Stanislaus Bakery, where Adrian would buy her cherry pierogies every Friday. The laundromat where they had done their washing together, sitting on the folding tables and talking about everything and nothing. The corner store run by Mrs. Chen, who used to slip them discount vegetables because she knew they were struggling. Mrs. Chen retired, Adrian said, nodding toward the store. But her daughter runs it now. I made sure she got a good price on the lease when the building was bought out. Elena glanced at him. You did that? I do pay attention to some things, Adrian said quietly, just not the right things. They continued walking until they reached a small park, barely more than a playground and a few benches surrounded by trees. It was here that Adrian had proposed 7 years ago, on an October evening when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled like autumn. Adrian led her to the same bench where he had gotten down on one knee. It looked older now, the paint chipped and faded, but it was the same bench, their bench. They sat down together, not touching, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. I used to come here, Adrian said finally, after the really bad days. The days when I had to do things I wasn't proud of, when I had to make decisions that kept me up at night. I would drive here and sit on this bench and try to remember why I was doing it all. Elena turned to look at him, surprised. I didn't know that. I never told you. I didn't want you to see that part of me, the part that was drowning in responsibility and violence and obligations I never asked for. Adrian's jaw tightened. My father built an empire, and when he died, he left me with no choice but to maintain it. Every day I tell myself I'm doing it for you, to protect you, to give you the life you deserve. But I never asked for that life, Elena said softly. I know. Adrian looked down at his hands. I know that now. But by the time I realized it, I was so deep in that world that I couldn't see a way out. And somewhere along the way, I started using it as an excuse. Every missed dinner, every forgotten anniversary, every night I came home too late and too tired to be the husband you needed. I told myself it was necessary, that you would understand, that it was temporary. It was never temporary, Elena said. No, Adrian agreed. It wasn't. And I kept lying to myself until the day you walked into my building and had to make an appointment to see me. Do you know what that felt like, Elena? When Dmitri called me after you left and told me my wife had been there, when I realized that my own staff didn't recognize you because I had kept you so separate from my life that you might as well not exist? His voice cracked on the last word, and Elena saw the shimmer of tears in his eyes, tears she had never seen him shed, and not even at his father's funeral. It felt like someone had torn my heart out, Adrian continued, because I realized that I had done to you exactly what I swore I never would. I made you invisible. I made you unimportant. I broke every promise I made on this bench 7 years ago. Elena felt her own tears spilling over. So what do we do now, Adrian? How do we fix something this broken? I don't know if we can, Adrian said honestly. But I know I have to try. Because losing my father's empire would hurt. Losing my position, my power, my reputation, all of that would hurt. But losing you would destroy me, Elena. Completely and utterly destroy me. He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. I'm not asking you to forget the last 7 years, Adrian said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm the way he used to do when they were young. I'm not asking you to pretend that I haven't failed you in every way that matters. I'm just asking you to let me try to be the man I promised I would be. The man you deserved all along. Elena looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. Desperation, yes. Fear, absolutely. But also something she hadn't seen in years, genuine vulnerability. One day isn't going to fix this, she said quietly. I know. Even if today is perfect, it doesn't erase 7 years of loneliness. I know that too. Then what's the point? Elena asked, and the question came out more broken than she intended. What's the point of one good day when we both know you'll go right back to who you've become? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and did something Elena never expected to see. He turned it off. Completely off. What are you doing? Elena asked, startled. My phone has been the third person in our marriage for 7 years, Adrian said, setting the device on the bench between them. Today, it's just you and me. No calls, No emergencies. No empire that can't survive without me for 24 hours. He stood up and held out his hand to her. Come on, he said. There's somewhere else I want to take you. Elena stared at the phone sitting on the bench, dark and silent. Such a small thing. Such a meaningless gesture in the grand scheme of everything that was broken between them. And yet, she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They walked 3 more blocks to a building Elena recognized immediately. The apartment complex where they had lived for those first 2 years of marriage. The Polish bakery on the ground floor was gone now, replaced by a trendy coffee shop, but the building itself looked mostly the same. Adrian stopped in front of it, and Elena saw something complicated cross his face. I bought this building, he said quietly, 4 years ago. Paid twice what it was worth just to make sure the owner would sell. Elena stared at him. Why? Because I was terrified I would forget, Adrian said simply. Forget who we were. Forget where we came from. Forget what actually mattered. I thought if I owned this building, if I kept this piece of our history, then somehow I could hold on to the man I used to be. But you didn't, Elena said. You forgot anyway. I did. Adrian's voice was heavy with regret. I kept this building like it was a museum to our past, and then I never came back to visit it. Just like I kept you in my life but stopped actually seeing you. He turned to face her fully, and the raw emotion in his expression made Elena's breath catch. I'm done with museums, Adrian said. I'm done preserving the past while ignoring the present. I want to actually live in this life with you, Elena. Not just maintain it, not just protect it, actually live it. Before Elena could respond, Adrian's stomach growled loudly. Despite everything, she felt a startled laugh escape her. When's the last time you ate? She asked. Adrian looked sheepish. Yesterday, maybe. I was too nervous about today to eat breakfast after I ruined the pancakes. Elena shook her head, and before she could think better of it, she grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the coffee shop. Come on, she said. You can't have an emotional breakthrough on an empty stomach. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively hipster places with exposed brick and reclaimed wood furniture and a menu that listed 17 different types of milk. But the coffee was good, and the pastries looked fresh, and more importantly, it was nearly empty at this hour. They ordered black coffee for Adrian, a cappuccino for Elena, and an assortment of pastries that the barista recommended with enthusiastic hand gestures. Then they found a table in the corner, away from the windows, where Adrian could sit with his back to the wall. Old habits, Elena thought. Even trying to be normal, he couldn't shake the instincts that came with his world. Do you remember our first real date? Adrian asked as they waited for their order. Elena smiled despite herself. The one where you took me to that terrible Italian restaurant and the waiter spilled wine all over your shirt? And I was so embarrassed I wanted to leave, but you insisted we stay, Adrian said. You told me the wine stain gave me character. It did, Elena said. You were trying so hard to impress me, and then everything went wrong, and you just relaxed. That was the night I fell in love with you, not the smooth, confident version you were trying to be. The real you, the one who could laugh at himself. Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. When did I stop being that person? I don't know, Elena said honestly. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice until he was already gone. Their order arrived, and for a few minutes they ate in comfortable silence. Elena watched Adrian tear apart a croissant with his fingers, eating it the way he always had, messily, unselfconsciously, like someone who had grown up never quite having enough food and still couldn't take it for granted. Tell me something, Adrian said suddenly. Something I should know about you but don't. Elena considered the question. There were so many things. 7 years of small moments and private thoughts that she had stopped sharing because there was never time, never space, never anyone listening. I started taking art classes, she said finally, 3 months ago, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at the community center in Lincoln Park. Adrian's eyes widened. You did? What kind of art? Watercolor. I'm terrible at it, Elena admitted with a small smile. But I like it. I like making something with my hands. I like the way the paint moves on the paper, how you can't completely control it. You have to work with it, adapt to it. Why didn't you tell me? Adrian asked, and there was genuine hurt in his voice. When would I have told you? Elena asked gently. You're never home on Tuesday or Thursday afternoons. And when you are home, you're on the phone or working on your laptop or planning the next meeting. There's no space for small things like my terrible watercolor paintings. Adrian set down his pastry, his appetite apparently forgotten. What else? He asked quietly. What else don't I know? Elena took a breath. I miss my sister. We used to talk every week, but I stopped calling because every conversation turned into her telling me I deserve better, and I didn't want to hear it. I started volunteering at an animal shelter because the penthouse felt too empty and quiet. I read romance novels even though you used to tease me about them because they remind me what it's like when people choose each other. Her voice cracked slightly. I cry sometimes, in the shower, where you won't hear me. I cry because I'm lonely, Adrian. I cry because I love you, and I hate feeling like loving you is the stupidest thing I've ever done. Adrian's face had gone pale. He looked like every word was a physical blow. I haven't been a husband to you, he said hoarsely. I've been a ghost, a stranger who shares your name and your bed, but doesn't know anything about your actual life. Yes, Elena said simply. How do I fix that? I don't know if you can, Elena said. But if you're serious about trying, it starts with this, with asking questions, with actually listening to the answers, with showing up, Adrian, not just physically, but actually being present. Adrian nodded slowly, and Elena could see him processing her words, taking them seriously in a way he hadn't taken anything seriously in years. What's your favorite piece? He asked. The watercolor painting. Which one do you like best? The question was so simple, so ordinary, that Elena felt tears prick at her eyes again. There's one I did last month, she said quietly, of a bridge over a stream. The water came out all wrong, too dark, too muddy. But there's a tree in the corner that actually looks like a tree. It's small and imperfect, but it's mine. Can I see it? Adrian asked. When we get home, will you show me? If you want. I do, Adrian said firmly. I want to see your paintings. I want to know about your art classes. I want to meet the people at the animal shelter. I want to read the romance novels you love. I want to know everything, Elena, all the things I should have been asking about for the last 7 years. Elena studied his face, looking for signs that this was just performance, just words meant to placate her. But all she saw was sincerity and a desperate kind of hope. Okay, she said softly. Okay. They finished their breakfast slowly, and then Adrian paid and they walked back out into the Chicago morning. The day was beautiful, one of those perfect autumn days where the air was crisp and the sky was impossibly blue. Where to next? Elena asked. Adrian smiled, and it was the real smile she remembered from years ago. Not the cold, controlled expression he wore at business meetings, but something warm and genuine. There's a record store, he said, about 6 blocks from here. It used to be our place. Do you remember? Elena did remember. The tiny shop with the creaking floors and the owner who knew every album in his collection. Adrian used to spend hours there, digging through crates of old vinyl, looking for rare recordings of Russian folk songs and Soviet-era jazz. She would sit in the corner and read while he searched, perfectly content in the quiet companionship. Is it still there? She asked. Let's find out. They walked through the neighborhood hand in hand, and Elena felt the strangest sensation of time collapsing. She was both the woman she had become, older, wearier, scarred by years of loneliness, and the girl she had been, walking these same streets with her whole life ahead of her. The record store was still there, miraculously unchanged. The same faded sign, the same dusty window display, the same bell that chimed when they pushed open the door. The owner, an elderly man named Morris, who had to be in his 80s now, looked up from behind the counter and did a double-take when he saw them. Adrian Volkov, Morris said, his voice raspy with age but warm with recognition. I'll be damned. Thought you'd forgotten about my little shop. Never, Adrian said, and there was genuine affection in his voice. How are you, Morris? Still breathing, still selling records nobody wants to buy anymore, Morris said with a shrug. Then he looked at Elena and smiled. And you brought the missus. Been a long time, young lady. Too long, Elena agreed. Morris waved his hand dismissively. Time moves different for young people. You got places to be, empires to build. But you're here now, and that's what matters. He gestured toward the back of the store. Got some new stock in last week. Well, new old stock. Some estate sale in Evanston. Beautiful stuff. Adrian's eyes lit up in a way Elena hadn't seen in years, and he headed toward the back of the store like a kid in a candy shop. Elena watched him go, then turned back to Morris, who was studying her with knowing eyes. He's trying, Morris said quietly. I can see it. Question is, are you going to let him? Elena was startled by the old man's directness. I don't know yet. Morris nodded. That's honest, at least. Can I tell you something? Something I learned in 53 years of marriage before my Dolores passed? Please. People don't change, Morris said. Not really, but they can choose to be better versions of themselves if they want it badly enough. The question isn't whether Adrian can be perfect. It's whether he can be present. Whether he can show up for the small moments and the boring days and the times when there's no crisis to solve or empire to maintain. He paused, then added, You deserve someone who shows up, Elena. Make sure he understands that. Before Elena could respond, Adrian emerged from the back carrying 3 records with the triumph of a treasure hunter who had struck gold. Look, he said, his accent thick with excitement. Okujava. Original pressing from 1968. I've been looking for this for years. He was so animated, so alive, that Elena felt her heart twist. This was the Adrian she had fallen in love with, the man who found joy in small discoveries, who collected beautiful things not for their value, but for their meaning. And this, Adrian continued, holding up another record, Vysotsky, the one with the song you loved, the one about the wolf hunt, Elena finished, the memory flooding back. You used to play it on Sunday mornings. I did. Adrian's expression softened. I'd forgotten that. They spent another hour in the record store, going through crates and listening to snippets of songs on Morris's old turntable. Adrian bought 6 records, including one that Elena picked out, a compilation of French chanson singers that she had never heard, but that Morris insisted was essential. When they finally left, the afternoon sun was already starting to slant toward evening. They had been out for hours, Elena realized. Hours where Adrian hadn't checked his phone once, hadn't mentioned business, hadn't retreated into the cold, controlled persona he usually wore like armor. Are you hungry? Adrian asked as they walked back to the car. Elena realized she was starving. Very. Good. Adrian unlocked the car but didn't get in. Instead, he leaned against it and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There's one more place I want to take you, if you're willing. Where? It's a surprise, Adrian said, but I promise it's worth it. Elena should have been exhausted, should have been emotionally drained from a day spent navigating the complicated landscape of their broken marriage, but instead she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Okay, she said, show me. They drove west this time, out of the city and into the suburbs, and then further still into areas that Elena didn't recognize. The urban landscape gave way to fields and scattered houses, and the sun began to set in shades of orange and gold. Finally, Adrian pulled off onto a dirt road that led to a small lake surrounded by trees. The water reflected the dying light like a mirror, and the only sound was the wind moving through the leaves. Where are we? Elena asked. Adrian parked the car and turned to her. Do you remember when we first got married? You told me you wanted to live somewhere with water. You said it made you feel peaceful. I remember. I found this place 3 years ago, Adrian said quietly. I was driving out here for a meeting with a contact, and I got lost, and I ended up here. And I thought of you. I thought about how much you would love it, how you would want to sit by this lake and watch the water and just be still. He got out of the car, and Elena followed. Adrian walked to the edge of the lake and stood there, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the water. I bought this land, he said, all of it, 40 acres. I told myself I was going to build you a house here, a place where you could escape from the city, from my life, from all of it, where you could paint and be quiet and just exist without the weight of being Mrs. Volkov. Elena felt her throat tighten. Why didn't you? Because I was a coward, Adrian said simply. Because building you a house meant admitting that you needed escape from me, that I had failed to make our actual home a place you wanted to be. So I kept the land, and I kept the dream, and I did nothing with either of them. He turned to face her, and in the fading light, Elena saw tears on his face. I don't know how to fix what I've broken, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know if 1 day or 1 week or 1 year is enough to prove to you that I can be the man you need. But I know this, Elena. I love you. I have always loved you, and I'm tired of being too scared and too proud and too stupid to show you. Elena walked to him across the grass, her own tears falling freely now. When she reached him, she put her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. I love you too, she whispered. I never stopped. Even when I wanted to. Even when it hurt too much to keep loving you, I couldn't stop. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away her tears. Then tell me what to do, he said desperately. Tell me how to earn you back. Elena looked up at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who ran an empire built on fear and loyalty, and saw only the boy she had fallen in love with, scared, vulnerable, completely human. Keep showing up, she said. Not just today, tomorrow, next week, next month. Keep choosing me over everything else. Keep asking me questions and listening to the answers. Keep being this version of yourself, the one who remembers that love is a verb, not just a feeling. I can do that, Adrian said. I will do that. And if you slip, Elena asked, if you fall back into old patterns, if the empire starts consuming you again, then you call me on it, Adrian said firmly. You don't stay silent. You don't let me get away with it. You demand better from me, Elena, because I need you to hold me accountable. I need you to remind me what actually matters. Elena nodded slowly. This doesn't fix everything. I know. I'm still hurt, still angry, still not sure if we can actually make this work. I know that too, but I want to try, Elena admitted. I want to believe that today isn't just an anomaly, that you can actually change. Adrian pulled her into his arms, and Elena let herself lean into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, cedar and smoke and something uniquely Adrian. I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving it to you, he murmured into her hair. I swear it, Malishka. On everything I have, everything I am. You are my priority now. Not the family, not the business, not the empire. You. They stood there by the lake as the sun set completely, holding each other in the gathering darkness. And for the first time in 7 years, Elena felt something that had been missing for so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like. Hope. They drove back to the city in comfortable silence, the kind that came from shared understanding rather than the hollow absence of words. Elena watched the lights of Chicago emerge from the darkness as they crossed back into the urban landscape, and she felt the real world beginning to reassert itself around the fragile bubble they had created during their day together. Adrian's phone was still off. That small detail felt more significant than any of the grand gestures or emotional revelations. The man who had built an empire on being constantly available, constantly in control, had chosen to be unreachable for an entire day. When they pulled into the underground garage of their building, Elena felt tension creep back into her shoulders. The penthouse waited above them, that beautiful, sterile space that had become more museum than home. Tomorrow would come with all its complications, the divorce papers that were still being prepared, the life she had started planning without him. The questions that one perfect day couldn't possibly answer, but tonight, she decided, could still belong to them. I'll make dinner, Adrian said as they rode the elevator up. And before you make that face, I promise to stick to things I can't burn, salad, pasta, nothing that requires actual cooking skills. Elena felt a smile tug at her lips despite herself. That's probably wise. The penthouse felt different when they walked in. The same furniture, the same view, the same expensive emptiness. But something had shifted. Maybe it was just her perception, or maybe it was the way Adrian immediately went to the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients with the focused determination of someone trying to prove a point. Go relax, he said when Elena moved to help. You've been patient with me all day. Let me do this. Elena hesitated, then nodded and retreated to the living room. She curled up on the sofa with one of the books she had been reading, a romance novel she had hidden on her e-reader because it felt too vulnerable to have Adrian see her reading something so hopeful, so full of love, that actually worked. 15 minutes later, Adrian appeared in the doorway, holding 2 wine glasses and a bottle of red. The pasta is cooking, he announced. And by cooking, I mean boiling in water, which even I can manage. He poured wine for both of them and handed her a glass. What are you reading? Elena hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding anymore. It's called the love hypothesis. Sarah recommended it. What's it about? Adrian asked, sitting down beside her. A woman who fake dates her colleague to avoid awkward situations, and then they fall in love for real, Elena said. It's silly, predictable, but I like it. Why do you like it? Adrian asked, and she could tell he genuinely wanted to know. Elena took a sip of wine, considering. Because it shows people choosing each other. Even when it's complicated, even when there are obstacles, they keep choosing to show up, they communicate, they work through problems instead of avoiding them. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Like we should have been doing. Yes. He nodded slowly, then stood. Let me check the pasta. Stay there. Keep reading. I want to hear more about this hypothesis later. Elena watched him disappear back into the kitchen, and something warm unfurled in her chest. These small moments, the questions, the attention, the genuine interest in her thoughts, this was what she had been starving for. Not grand romantic gestures or expensive gifts, just the simple act of being seen. Dinner was surprisingly edible. Adrian had made spaghetti aglio e olio, heavy on the garlic and olive oil, exactly the way Elena liked it. They ate at the kitchen counter rather than the formal dining table, their knees touching, the conversation flowing more easily than it had in years. Tell me about the animal shelter, Adrian said, twirling pasta around his fork. What do you do there? I walk the dogs mostly, Elena said. There's this old pit bull named Bruno who nobody wants to adopt because he looks scary. But he's the sweetest thing. He just wants to lean against you and snore. You always wanted a dog, Adrian remembered. When we first got married, you talked about getting one. You said the penthouse wasn't appropriate for pets. Adrian winced. I said a lot of stupid things, apparently. Would you still want one? A dog? Elena looked at him carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine interest or just more promises he wouldn't keep. Are you actually asking, or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? I'm asking, Adrian said firmly. If you want a dog, we'll get a dog. Hell, we'll get Bruno if he needs a home. The penthouse has enough space, and if it doesn't feel right here, we have 40 acres by a lake where he could run. The mention of the lake property made Elena's heart skip. You're serious about that place? I've never been more serious about anything, Adrian said. I want to build something there. Not right away. I know we have work to do first, but eventually. A place that's just ours, where you can paint, and I can pretend to know how to garden, and we can remember what it feels like to just be two people who love each other. Elena felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry more in the last 2 days than she had in the previous 2 years. But these tears felt different, less like grief and more like release. I'd like that, she said softly. They cleaned up dinner together, falling into an easy rhythm that reminded Elena of their early days together. Adrian washed while she dried, and they talked about small things, the record store, Morris's story about his late wife, the terrible coffee shop with 17 types of milk. When the kitchen was clean, Adrian turned to her with an expression that was both nervous and determined. I want to show you something, he said. Will you come with me? He led her to his office, a room Elena rarely entered because it was Adrian's domain, filled with files and computers and the infrastructure of his empire. But instead of going to his desk, Adrian went to a closet in the corner and pulled out a large box. I told you I bought our old building 4 years ago, he said, setting the box on the desk. But I didn't tell you everything. When I bought it, the new owners were clearing out the storage areas. They found some things the previous tenants had left behind, including things from our apartment. Elena's breath caught. What kind of things? Adrian opened the box, and Elena saw pieces of their past carefully preserved, a chipped coffee mug they had bought at a street fair, a photograph of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful and impossibly naive. A mixtape Adrian had made for her before they could afford a wedding ring. But what made Elena's heart stop was the small notebook at the bottom of the box. Is that? She whispered. Your journal, Adrian confirmed. The one you kept during our first year of marriage. You used to write in it every night before bed. Elena had forgotten about that journal. She picked it up with trembling hands and opened it to a random page. Her younger self's handwriting stared back at her, full of dreams and observations and small moments of joy. Adrian brought me coffee in bed this morning. Not because it's a special occasion, just because he knows I love the first cup of the day. He says it's his favorite part of the morning, watching me wake up slowly. I think I could live in these small moments forever. Elena felt a sob catch in her throat. I read it, Adrian admitted quietly. After I bought the building, I sat in our old apartment and I read every page. And I realized that I used to be good at this, at loving you, at making you happy. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how. He took the journal gently from her hands and flipped to a page he had marked. This one destroyed me, he said, and started reading aloud. Adrian told me today that his biggest fear is becoming like his father. Not the power or the violence, he said he can handle that, but the loneliness. Marcus Volkov had everything except people who actually loved him. Adrian made me promise that I would never let him become that isolated, that I would always remind him what matters. I told him I would. I told him I'd never let him lose himself. Adrian's voice cracked. You tried, Elena. For 7 years you tried to keep that promise. But I made it impossible. I pushed you away every time you tried to reach me. I chose the Empire over you again and again, and I became exactly what I feared most, isolated, surrounded by people but completely alone, just like my father. He set the journal down and looked at her with raw honesty. The difference is my father died without realizing what he had lost. I still have a chance, if you'll give it to me. Elena reached for him, and Adrian pulled her into his arms. They stood there in his office, surrounded by the evidence of both their past and his present, and Elena felt the full weight of their complicated history. I'm scared, she whispered against his chest. I'm scared that this is just a moment, that tomorrow you'll get a call you can't ignore and everything will go back to how it was. I'm scared that I'll let myself hope again and you'll break my heart all over again. I'm scared too, Adrian admitted. I'm scared I don't actually know how to change, that the habits I've built over 7 years are too strong to break, that I'll fail you even though I'm trying my hardest not to. So what do we do? Elena asked. We take it one day at a time, Adrian said. Tomorrow, I'm going to have to turn my phone back on. I'm going to have to deal with whatever emergencies piled up while I was gone. But I'm also going to come home for dinner, and I'm going to ask you about your day, and I'm going to keep showing up. And if you don't? Elena pulled back to look at him. If you slip back into old patterns? Then you call me on it immediately, Adrian said. Don't wait. Don't give me chances to explain it away. You tell me the moment I start failing, and I'll correct it. Because I need you to hold me accountable, Elena. I need you to demand better. Elena nodded slowly. I didn't sign the divorce papers yet. Adrian went very still. You didn't? No, I brought them with me to my consultation, but I couldn't do it. Some part of me wanted to give you one more chance. She looked up at him. But I'm keeping them, Adrian. They're in my bag, and they're going to stay there until I'm absolutely certain that we can actually fix this. That's fair, Adrian said, though she could see the fear in his eyes. And I need you to understand something, Elena continued. I love you, but love isn't enough anymore. I need respect. I need partnership. I need to feel like I matter in your life, not just as Mrs. Volkov, but as Elena. As a person with my own dreams and interests and value beyond being your wife. You do matter, Adrian said fiercely. You matter more than anything. Then prove it, Elena said. Not with one perfect day, but with 1,000 imperfect ones. Prove it by showing up when it's boring, when there's nothing romantic or dramatic happening, when it's just Tuesday night and we're both tired and there's nothing on TV. That's when I need you to choose me. I will, Adrian promised. I swear to you, Elena, I will. They stood there in the quiet of his office, and Elena made a decision. She wasn't ready to forgive everything. Wasn't ready to pretend that 7 years of loneliness could be erased by one day of attention. But she was ready to give him a real chance, not out of weakness or desperation, but from a place of clear-eyed understanding. She knew who Adrian Volkov was. She knew the world he operated in, the pressures he faced, the impossible balancing act between being a good man and running an empire built on violence. And she knew that change would be messy and imperfect and full of setbacks. But for the first time in years, she believed he actually wanted to try. Show me the watercolors, Adrian said suddenly. The ones you've been painting. I want to see them. Elena blinked at the change of subject. Now? Right now. I want to know this part of your life, the part I've been missing. She led him to the second bedroom that she had converted into a small studio space. Adrian had probably never even opened this door in the last 3 years. Inside, Elena's paintings were scattered around, some framed, most not, all of them amateur but earnest attempts at capturing moments of beauty. Adrian walked around the room slowly, studying each painting with genuine attention. He stopped in front of the one Elena had mentioned at breakfast, the bridge over the stream with the messy water and the one tree that actually looked right. "This one," he said. "This is my favorite." "Why?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. "Because it's imperfect," Adrian said simply. "The water is too dark, like you said. The proportions are off. But that tree is perfect because you took your time with it. You didn't rush, you cared about getting it right." He turned to look at her. "That's what I want to do with us. I don't care if it's messy or imperfect. I just want to take the time to get it right." Elena felt something in her chest loosen. "That's probably the most romantic thing you've said to me in 7 years. Adrian smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm out of practice. I'll probably say a lot of awkward, fumbling things while I figure out how to do this again." "I can live with awkward," Elena said, "as long as it's honest." They spent the next hour in her studio, and Elena told him about each painting, the landscape she had attempted and failed at, the portrait of their old apartment building that she had painted from memory, the abstract piece she had created on a particularly lonely night when she couldn't sleep and needed to do something with her hands. Adrian listened to all of it, asked questions, and didn't once check the phone that was still turned off somewhere in his office. When they finally went to bed, together, in the master bedroom rather than separate rooms, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in their bed in years. Intimacy. Not the physical kind, though Adrian held her close with the tenderness of someone who had almost lost something precious, but the emotional kind, the sense of being truly known and valued by the person lying next to her. "Tomorrow is going to be hard," Adrian said quietly in the darkness. "The second Dmitri finds out I was unreachable all day, he's going to lose his mind. There will be problems that piled up, decisions that needed to be made, people who are angry I wasn't available." "I know," Elena said. "But I'm still coming home for dinner," Adrian said firmly. "Even if the world is on fire, even if it costs me deals or makes people angry, I'm coming home." "Okay," Elena said softly. "And I want you to teach me your schedule," Adrian continued. "I want to know when your art classes are, when you volunteer at the shelter, when you see your friends. I want to build my life around yours instead of expecting you to orbit around mine." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "You're really serious about this?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Adrian said. "I almost lost you, Elena. I'm not going to make that mistake again." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in years, Elena didn't wake up alone. The next morning arrived too quickly. Elena heard Adrian's alarm go off at 6, felt him start to move, then pause. She opened her eyes to find him looking down at her with an expression of wonder. "I forgot what this was like," he said quietly, "waking up with you still here." "I'm usually up before you leave," Elena said. "I just pretend to sleep." Pain flashed across Adrian's face. "How long have you been doing that?" 3 years, maybe 4. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, then kissed her forehead. "No more pretending, from either of us." He got up and went through his morning routine, but this time he came back to the bedroom before leaving. He was dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits, phone now back in his hand, the armor of Adrian Volkov settling back into place. But he sat on the edge of the bed and took Elena's hand. "I'll be home by 7, he said. "I'm scheduling it in my calendar right now." He typed on his phone with one hand while holding hers with the other. "Dinner with Elena, non-negotiable, every night this week." "What if there's an emergency?" Elena asked. "Then I'll deal with it after dinner," Adrian said. "Or I'll bring you with me. But I'm not disappearing on you again." Elena squeezed his hand. "Okay." Adrian leaned down and kissed her, and there was promise in that kiss. A commitment to the messy, imperfect work of rebuilding what they had broken. When he left, Elena stayed in bed for a while, listening to the sounds of the penthouse settling around her. She thought about the divorce papers still tucked in her bag, about the consultation with Margaret Chen that was supposed to happen next week, about the life she had been planning without Adrian. She picked up her phone and sent a text to the lawyer's office. "I need to postpone our meeting. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to reschedule." It felt both terrifying and liberating to hit send. Elena got up and made herself coffee, then settled in the living room with her phone. She called her sister Rachel for the first time in 2 months. "Elena?" Rachel's voice was cautious. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know yet," Elena said honestly. "But I wanted to tell you that Adrian and I are trying to work things out." There was a long pause. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No," Elena admitted. "But I need to try. For real this time. With boundaries and expectations and actual consequences if he fails. I need to know for certain whether this marriage can be saved." "And if it can't," Rachel asked gently, "then I'll know I did everything possible," Elena said, "and I'll be able to walk away without regrets." They talked for another hour, and Rachel was surprisingly supportive once she understood that Elena was going into this with open eyes rather than blind hope. She promised to visit in a few weeks, to see for herself how Adrian was doing, to be there for Elena no matter what happened. After they hung up, Elena made another call, to Sarah, who was thrilled to hear that Elena sounded more like herself than she had in years. "So the anniversary disaster actually turned into a breakthrough?" Sarah asked. "Maybe," Elena said. "It's too early to tell, but yesterday it was like having my husband back. The real one, not the ghost who's been living here." "I'm happy for you," Sarah said, "but also I'm going to keep a close eye on this situation. And if Adrian Volkov breaks your heart again, I will personally key his very expensive car." Elena laughed, and it felt good. "Deal." She spent the rest of the day working on a new painting, this time attempting a portrait. She used a photograph from their wedding day as reference, trying to capture not just their faces, but the hope and joy and terrifying optimism that had radiated from two young people who thought love was enough. Maybe it wasn't enough, but maybe, with work and honesty, and two people willing to actually try, it could be a foundation to build on. At 6:30, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. "Leaving office now? Do you want me to pick up anything for dinner?" Such a simple question, such an ordinary gesture. And yet it made Elena's eyes sting with tears. She texted back, "Just you. That's all I need." Adrian arrived at 7:05, apologizing for the 5-minute delay caused by traffic. He had stopped at a flower shop and bought her a bouquet of wildflowers. Nothing fancy or expensive, just a simple arrangement that reminded Elena of the flowers Adrian used to pick for her when they were too poor to buy them. "I remembered you liked these," he said, handing them to her. "Better than roses." "Much better," Elena agreed, taking the flowers and breathing in their sweet, uncomplicated scent. They made dinner together, a stir-fry that was slightly overcooked but edible, and talked about their days. Adrian told her about the minor crisis he had dealt with, the angry phone calls from Dmitri, the rearranging of his schedule to accommodate his new priorities. Elena told him about her conversation with Rachel, about the painting she was working on, about the email she got from the animal shelter asking if she wanted to help with an adoption event next weekend. "Will you come with me?" Elena asked. "To the adoption event?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "Of course, what time?" "Saturday afternoon, 2 to 5. "I'll be there," Adrian said, and he made a note in his phone immediately. After dinner, they sat on the sofa and Adrian asked if she would read to him from her romance novel. Elena was surprised by the request but agreed, and they spent the next hour with Elena reading aloud while Adrian listened, his arm around her shoulders, occasionally asking questions about the characters or laughing at the witty dialogue. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary evening, no grand gestures or dramatic revelations. Just two people sharing space and time and attention. And somehow, it meant everything. When they went to bed that night, Elena felt the smallest shift in her heart. Not forgiveness. That would take time. Not certainty. That might never come. But possibility. The genuine possibility that they might actually find their way back to each other. "Thank you for coming home," she whispered in the darkness. "Thank you for letting me," Adrian replied. And for the second night in a row, Elena fell asleep in her husband's arms, allowing herself to hope that maybe this time the story would have a different ending. The pattern held for 3 days. Adrian came home at 7 each evening. They cooked dinner together, talked about their days, fell asleep in the same bed. It felt fragile and precious, like something made of glass that could shatter at the slightest pressure. Elena kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. On Thursday morning, it did. Elena was in her studio working on the wedding portrait when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Volkov? A woman's voice, professional and cold. Yes? This is Amanda Chen from the law offices of Chen and Associates. I'm calling to confirm our consultation scheduled for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Elena's stomach dropped. She had sent that text postponing the meeting, but apparently it had gone to the general office line, not directly to Margaret Chen. I actually need to cancel that, Elena said quickly. Cancel or reschedule? Amanda asked. Elena opened her mouth to say reschedule, to keep that safety net in place. But the words that came out were different. Cancel, she said. I'm not moving forward with the divorce right now. There was a pause. I understand. If your situation changes, please don't hesitate to call. We'll keep your file for 6 months before archiving it. After she hung up, Elena sat in her studio staring at her phone. She had just closed a door, not locked it. The file would be there if she needed it. But she had chosen to walk away from the exit she had been planning for months. The terror of that choice hit her all at once. What if she was making a mistake? What if 3 days of Adrian showing up was just an anomaly, and next week everything would slide back to the way it was? What if she was setting herself up for another 7 years of loneliness? Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. Meeting running late. We'll be home by 7:30. I'm sorry. Elena stared at the message. 30 minutes. Not hours. Not a vague promise of sometime tonight, but a specific time with an apology for the delay. She texted back. Okay. Be safe. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. Thank you for understanding. I'm trying, Malishka. I promise I'm trying. Elena set down her phone and looked at the painting she was working on. The young couple stared back at her, frozen in a moment of pure hope. She picked up her brush and added a touch of shadow to the background, just enough to suggest that even in moments of joy, complexity existed. Adrian arrived at 7:35, carrying takeout from the Thai place Elena loved. I figured since I was late, I should bring reinforcements, he said, holding up the bag. They ate pad thai and green curry at the kitchen counter, and Adrian told her about the meeting that had run over. The Kozlov family wants to negotiate new territory lines, he said. It's delicate. Viktor Kozlov is old school. He doesn't like change, doesn't like compromise. The meeting was supposed to be an hour. It turned into 3. Did you reach an agreement? Elena asked. Eventually, but it cost me more than I wanted to give up. Adrian set down his fork and looked at her. 5 years ago, I would have stayed until midnight to get better terms. I would have ground him down through sheer persistence. Today, I took the deal at 7:15 because I promised to be home. Was it worth it? Elena asked quietly. The worst deal, I mean. Adrian reached for her hand. Absolutely. Because coming home to you is worth more than any territory or percentage. I'm just hoping I don't have to prove that every single day by taking bad deals. Elena squeezed his hand. You don't. But you do have to keep showing me that I'm the priority. That when it comes down to a choice between the Empire and us, you'll choose us. Every time, Adrian said firmly. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Adrian's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his expression went carefully neutral. It's Dmitri, he said. I need to take this. Elena's heart sank, but she nodded. Adrian answered and walked out to the living room, and Elena could hear his voice through the door, low and controlled, switching between English and Russian as he dealt with whatever crisis had arisen. She climbed into bed and tried not to let the familiar pattern of anxiety take hold. This was part of his life. He couldn't just ignore his responsibilities. The question was whether he would let those responsibilities consume the entire night the way they used to. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Elena picked up her book but couldn't focus on the words. At 25 minutes, Adrian came back into the bedroom. He looked tired and frustrated, but he was there. Sorry, he said, plugging his phone into the charger on the far side of the room, pointedly out of reach. There's a situation with one of our shipments. Customs is asking questions they shouldn't be asking. Dmitri wanted me to call in some favors tonight. And? Elena asked. And I told him to handle it himself, Adrian said, climbing into bed. That's what I pay him for. If it's truly an emergency that only I can resolve, he can call me tomorrow during business hours. Elena felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. You really told him that? I really did. He wasn't happy about it. Adrian pulled her close. But he'll get over it. And if he can't, then maybe it's time I start delegating more anyway. I've been the bottleneck for too long, making myself indispensable. It's not sustainable. Your father ran everything himself, Elena said quietly. He never trusted anyone else to make important decisions. And it killed him, Adrian said bluntly. The stress, the constant vigilance, the inability to let go. That's not how I want to live. That's not the man I want to be. He kissed her forehead. I'd rather be the man who comes to bed with his wife than the man who dies alone at his desk. They fell asleep tangled together, and Elena allowed herself to believe a little more. Friday brought a different kind of test. Elena was at her art class, watercolor landscapes with an instructor named Margaret, who had infinite patience for Elena's struggles with proper shading, when her phone buzzed with a call from Adrian. She almost didn't answer, thinking he was calling to cancel their dinner plans. But something made her step out into the hallway and pick up. Elena. Adrian's voice was strained. Where are you? At my art class. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He paused. I want to see you. Where's the class? Elena gave him the address of the community center, confused. 20 minutes later, Adrian walked through the door still in his suit, looking completely out of place among the retired teachers and stay-at-home parents who made up most of the class. Margaret looked up from helping another student and raised her eyebrows. Can I help you? I'm here to see my wife, Adrian said, and his eyes found Elena across the room. If that's okay. Elena stood, wiping paint off her hands. What are you doing here? You said you take this class every Thursday and Friday, Adrian said. I realized I've never seen it. Never seen you paint. I wanted to. Margaret, picking up on the emotional undercurrent, smiled. Well, we have about 40 minutes left. You're welcome to observe. Or participate, if you'd like. I can't paint to save my life, Adrian admitted. Neither can most of us when we start, Margaret said cheerfully, but you're welcome to try. Adrian looked at Elena, a question in his eyes. Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion and nodded. He ended up at the table next to her, with a piece of watercolor paper and a palette of paints, attempting to follow Margaret's instructions on painting a simple sunset. He was terrible at it. The colors bled together into muddy browns. The horizon line was crooked. The whole thing looked like something a child might create. But he was there, and he was trying. And when the class ended and he held up his disaster of a painting with a rueful smile, Elena felt something crack open in her chest. I think I'll stick to my day job, Adrian said. I think that's wise, Elena agreed, laughing. But she took the painting from him carefully, like it was something precious. I'm keeping this. It's terrible. I don't care. It's yours. They drove home together, and Adrian told her about his day, how he had been in a meeting with his accountants going over quarterly numbers, and he had suddenly realized that he had no idea what Elena was doing at that exact moment, whether she was happy, whether she was lonely, whether she was painting something beautiful or struggling with technique. So I just left, he said. Told them we'd finish Monday and drove to find you. I needed to see this part of your life, to understand it. You left a meeting to watch me paint a mediocre landscape, Elena said wonderingly. I left a meeting because I realized I've spent 7 years talking about profit margins and territory disputes, and I don't know what makes you happy anymore, Adrian said. That's not acceptable, not if I want to actually be your husband instead of just the man you're married to. That night, Elena took the divorce papers out of her bag and put them in the back of her desk drawer. Not thrown away. She wasn't quite ready for that, but no longer waiting on the table, ready to be signed at the first sign of failure. Saturday afternoon brought the adoption event at the animal shelter. Adrian showed up exactly on time, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that made him look younger and less intimidating. Elena introduced him to the volunteers she worked with, to the dogs she had been walking, and finally to Bruno. The old pit bull looked at Adrian with suspicion, his scarred ears flat against his head. Adrian crouched down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. Hey there, old man, he said softly in Russian. I hear you're a tough guy who nobody wants. I know something about that. Bruno's tail gave a tentative wag. Adrian held out his hand, letting the dog sniff him, not pushing. It took a full minute before Bruno relaxed and leaned his considerable weight against Adrian's leg. "He likes you," Elena said, surprised. "He's usually more wary with men." "Dogs know," Adrian said, scratching behind Bruno's ears. "They can sense when someone understands what it's like to be dangerous and tired and just wanting someone to see past the scars." He looked up at Elena. "Can we take him home?" Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. He needs a family, and we have room. Unless you don't want—" "I want," Elena said quickly. "I've wanted since the first day I met him." They left the adoption event 3 hours later with Bruno in the back seat of Adrian's car, his massive head resting on the center console between them, already claiming his space in their lives. That evening, they took Bruno to the pet store and let him pick out toys and a bed. Adrian insisted on getting the most expensive orthopedic bed, claiming that old warriors deserved comfort. They walked through their neighborhood with Bruno between them, and Elena felt like they were a real family for the first time in years. "People are staring," Adrian said with amusement. "I don't think they expected to see Adrian Volkov walking a pit bull through Lincoln Park on a Saturday night." "Good," Elena said. Let them see that you're more than just the scary crime boss. Let them see you're also the man who adopts senior dogs nobody else wants." Adrian smiled and laced his fingers through hers. "I like that version of me better." Sunday morning, Elena woke to find Adrian already up, sitting on the floor of their bedroom with Bruno's head in his lap, talking quietly to the dog in Russian. She stayed still, listening to the cadence of his voice, even though she couldn't understand most of the words. When he noticed she was awake, he looked almost embarrassed. "Sorry, did I wake you?" "No. What were you telling him?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I was telling him that I know what it's like to be afraid nobody will choose you, to feel like you're too broken or too dangerous for anyone to love. But that sometimes, if you're very lucky, someone sees past all that and chooses you anyway." He paused, then added, "I was talking about Bruno, but I was also talking about me." Elena got out of bed and sat down next to them, resting her head on Adrian's shoulder. "I chose you a long time ago. I just needed you to choose me back." "I'm choosing you," Adrian said firmly. "Every day, every moment. I know 3 weeks isn't enough to prove that. I know I need to show you for months, maybe years, that this isn't temporary. But I'm ready to do that work, Elena, however long it takes." The real test came on Monday morning. Adrian's phone started ringing at 5:30 a.m., shattering the quiet of their bedroom. Elena felt him tense beside her, felt the familiar pattern of crisis about to consume him. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, then said, "I'll be there in an hour." When he hung up, Elena's heart was already sinking. "There's a problem," Adrian said, sitting up. "A big one. The Kozlov deal is falling apart. Victor is claiming we breached the terms we agreed to last week. If I don't fix this now, we could have a war on our hands." Elena nodded, trying to keep the disappointment off her face. This was reality. This was his world. She couldn't expect him to just ignore situations that could turn violent. But Adrian didn't immediately leap out of bed. Instead, he turned to face her. "I have to go deal with this," he said. "But I want you to know something. This is not me choosing the empire over you. This is me preventing bloodshed. There's a difference." "I know," Elena said quietly. "I'll be home tonight," Adrian continued. "It might be late, but I'll be here. And tomorrow I'm going to start training Dmitri to handle more of these situations. Because this can't keep happening. I can't keep being the only person who can prevent wars." He kissed her forehead, then got up and started getting ready with quick, economical movements. Elena watched him transform from the man who had been talking to their dog in Russian to the dangerous, controlled Adrian Volkov, who ran a criminal empire. Before he left, he paused at the door. "Elena?" "Yes?" "I love you, and I'm going to fix this so that nights like this become the exception, not the rule. I promise." Then he was gone, and Elena was alone with her thoughts and a pit bull who had climbed onto the bed and was snoring into her pillow. She got up and made coffee, trying not to let anxiety take hold. This was a test, the first real crisis since they had started rebuilding. The question was whether Adrian would actually come home, or whether the familiar pattern of one emergency leading to another would consume him again. Elena spent the day painting. She had started a new piece, the lake where Adrian had taken her that first day. She tried to capture the way the dying light had looked on the water, the feeling of standing at the edge of possibility. Her phone stayed silent all day. At 6 p.m., Elena started making dinner. Chicken soup, the kind Adrian's grandmother used to make, using the recipe Katya had taught her years ago. If he didn't come home to eat it, at least it would keep. 6:30 came and went. 7:30. At 7:45, Elena heard the elevator in their building, then the sound of Adrian's key in the lock. She stayed in the kitchen, not wanting to seem like she had been anxiously waiting. Adrian appeared in the doorway, and he looked absolutely exhausted. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled in a way that suggested he had been running his hands through it for hours, but he was home. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said immediately. "The meeting went longer than I expected. Victor is a stubborn old bastard who wanted to squeeze every possible concession out of me. But it's resolved. No war, no bloodshed, just a lot of posturing and negotiation." "Are you okay?" Elena asked. Adrian crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms. "I'm exhausted. I'm frustrated. I had to give up more than I wanted to, but I'm home, and I'm with you, so yes, I'm okay." He pulled back and looked at her seriously. "I need you to understand something, Elena. Days like today are going to happen. I can't eliminate them entirely, not without completely abandoning everything my father built. But I can limit them. I can set boundaries. I can train other people to handle things, so I'm not always the one being called at 5 in the morning." "I know," Elena said, "and I'm not asking you to abandon your responsibilities. I'm just asking you to keep coming home." "Always," Adrian said, "even when it's late. Even when I'm tired, I'll always come home to you." They ate the soup together, and Adrian told her about the negotiation, the strategies he had used, the concessions he had made, the way Victor had finally agreed to terms when Adrian had invoked the memory of both their fathers and the alliance they had maintained for decades. "You're good at this," Elena observed. "Negotiating, reading people, finding the compromise that works." "I've had a lot of practice," Adrian said wryly, "though I'm better at negotiating with rival crime families than I am at negotiating with my own wife." "That's because you can't intimidate me," Elena said with a small smile. "No," Adrian agreed. "But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I need someone in my life who sees through all the power and control and just wants me to be present." After dinner, they took Bruno for a walk through the neighborhood. The night was cool and clear, and the city lights reflected off the lake in the distance. They walked in comfortable silence, their hands linked, the dog trotting contentedly between them. When they got home, Adrian did something that surprised Elena. He went to his office and came back with a leather-bound planner. "What's that?" Elena asked. "My schedule for the next 3 months," Adrian said. "I want to go through it with you. I want you to see what I have planned, and I want you to tell me which commitments I need to keep and which ones I can delegate or cancel." They sat together on the sofa, and Adrian walked her through his calendar. Meetings with family heads, shipment schedules, financial reviews, territory negotiations. It was overwhelming, the sheer volume of obligations that filled every single day. But as they went through it, Adrian started making changes. "This meeting with the accountants, Dmitri can handle this. This negotiation with the shipping company, I'll send Victor, he's better at that kind of thing anyway. This dinner with the Romanov family, we can both go to that. Make it a social occasion instead of just business." By the time they finished, Adrian had cleared almost 30 hours from his schedule over the next month. "That's 30 hours I can spend with you," he said. 30 hours where I'm not Adrian Volkov, the crime boss. I'm just Adrian, your husband." Elena looked at the revised calendar, then at Adrian, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. He wasn't just making promises. He was making concrete, documented changes. He was restructuring his entire life to make room for her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me," Adrian said. "This is what I should have been doing all along. This is me finally understanding that being powerful means nothing if I lose the people I love." That night, as they lay in bed with Bruno snoring loudly from his expensive orthopedic bed in the corner, Elena made a decision. She got up quietly and went to her desk. She took out the divorce papers that she had filed away and stood there looking at them for a long moment. Then she walked to the kitchen and fed them into the shredder. The sound woke Adrian, who appeared in the doorway looking concerned. "What are you doing?" he asked. Elena turned to face him, and she was crying but also smiling. "I'm choosing us," she said simply. "I'm choosing to believe that we can actually fix this, that you're serious about changing, that our marriage is worth fighting for." Adrian crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "We can fix this," he said fiercely. "I swear to you, Elena, we can." "I know," Elena whispered against his chest. "I'm finally starting to believe it." They stood there in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, holding each other while scraps of legal documents lay in the recycling bin, and Elena felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Certainty. Not the certainty that everything would be perfect, not the naive belief that Adrian would never slip or struggle or have moments where the Empire tried to pull him away, but the certainty that he would keep fighting to come back to her, that he had finally understood what she had been trying to tell him for years, that love wasn't just about grand gestures or expensive gifts or promises made in moments of crisis. It was about showing up every day, even when it was hard, even when it was boring, even when there were 1,000 other things demanding attention. It was about choosing each other, over and over again, in ways both large and small. And for the first time in 7 years, Elena believed that Adrian Volkov was finally ready to make that choice. The weeks that followed the shredding of the divorce papers brought a rhythm to their lives that Elena had almost forgotten was possible. Not perfection. There were still late nights when Adrian came home exhausted from negotiations. Still mornings when his phone rang before dawn with emergencies that couldn't wait. But there was also consistency, presence, the steady accumulation of small moments that proved he was serious about the choice he had made. 3 weeks after destroying the papers, Elena woke to find Adrian already dressed, sitting on the edge of their bed with an expression that was both nervous and determined. "I need to tell you something," he said. Elena's stomach tightened with automatic anxiety. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but there's something I should have told you weeks ago, and I keep putting it off because I'm afraid of how you'll react." Adrian took a breath. "The morning you came to my office, the day you needed an appointment to see me, I fired the receptionist." Elena sat up. "You what?" "I fired her that same day. The second Dmitri told me what happened, I called down and had her removed from the building." Adrian's jaw was tight. "I was furious. How dare she not recognize you? How dare she treat you like some random visitor instead of the most important person in my life?" "Adrian, let me finish," he said quietly. "I fired her because I was angry and humiliated and looking for someone to blame. But the truth is, it wasn't her fault. She had been working there for 3 months, and I had never once mentioned you. Never put your picture in the system, never brought you to the office. I kept you completely separate from that part of my life, and then I punished her for not knowing something I had never told her." He looked at Elena with raw honesty. "I rehired her the next day and apologized, but I need you to know that my first instinct was to blame everyone except myself. That's how deep the problem was, Elena. I couldn't even see that I was the one who made you invisible." Elena took his hand. "You're telling me this now. That matters." "I'm telling you because I don't want there to be secrets between us anymore," Adrian said. "Even the ugly things, especially the ugly things." That afternoon, Adrian did something that surprised her even more. He asked her to come to his office. "Why?" Elena asked, confused. "Because I want you to understand what I do," Adrian said. "Not the violence or the territory disputes, but the actual work. The negotiations, the logistics, the people I deal with. I want you to see that part of my life so it's not this mysterious black box that takes me away from you." They drove to his headquarters together, and this time when Elena walked into the lobby, the receptionist, the same young woman from months ago, smiled with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Volkov, it's wonderful to see you again. Mr. Volkov is expecting you." Adrian squeezed Elena's hand as they walked to the elevator. His office was on the top floor, a space Elena had never seen. It was surprisingly understated. No ostentatious displays of wealth, no weapons mounted on walls like trophies. Just a large desk, comfortable furniture, and walls lined with books in both English and Russian. "This is where you spend most of your time," Elena said, looking around. This is where I used to spend most of my time, Adrian corrected. Now I'm here maybe 6 hours a day instead of 12. He introduced her to his key people. Dmitri, his second in command, who looked at Elena with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Victor, the older man who handled shipping logistics. Anya, his accountant, who turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who immediately asked Elena about her art. Adrian has your terrible sunset painting in his desk drawer, Anya said with a sly smile. He takes it out sometimes and stares at it like it's a Rembrandt. Adrian actually looked embarrassed. It reminds me of what's important. Over the next few hours, Elena sat in on meetings and watched Adrian work. She saw the way people deferred to him, the weight of authority he carried, the careful balance he maintained between being approachable and being feared. But she also saw something else, the way he checked his watch frequently, the way he cut conversations short that started to veer into unnecessary territory, the way he delegated decisions that he once would have insisted on making himself. During a break between meetings, Elena found him standing at the window looking out over the city. "Thank you for showing me this," she said. Adrian turned. "Do you understand it better now? What I do? Why it's complicated?" "I do," Elena said honestly. "And I understand why you can't just walk away from it. This isn't just business, Adrian. These are people who depend on you, families whose livelihoods are tied to the decisions you make." "But it doesn't have to consume me the way it has been," Adrian said. "I've been using it as an excuse, telling myself I'm indispensable when really I was just afraid to let go of control." He took her hand. "I'm learning to trust other people, to delegate, to accept that I don't have to personally approve every single decision. It's hard, but it's necessary, because nothing in this building is worth losing you." That evening, they had dinner with Dmitri and his wife Svetlana at a small Russian restaurant in Brighton Beach. Elena had met Dmitri briefly before, at formal events where he was always hovering near Adrian discussing business. But this was different, casual, social, with wives included and business explicitly off the table. Svetlana was warm and funny, with opinions about everything and a wicked sense of humor that made Elena laugh until her sides hurt. Over plates of pelmeni and glasses of vodka, she told stories about the early days of their marriage, when Dmitri was just starting out and they lived in a tiny apartment with 3 other families. "Men like ours," Svetlana said, gesturing at Adrian and Dmitri with her fork, "they think they have to carry the world on their shoulders. They think asking for help makes them weak. It takes a strong woman to teach them that partnership isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes the weight bearable." She looked at Elena directly. "I heard what happened, how close you came to leaving. Good for you. These stubborn Russians need to be shaken awake sometimes." Adrian and Dmitri exchanged glances, and Dmitri raised his glass. "To our wives, who are far smarter than we deserve." They all drank, and Elena felt something warm spread through her chest. She had spent 7 years feeling isolated in her role as Mrs. Volkov, not quite fitting into the world Adrian operated in. But here was Svetlana, who understood, who had walked the same difficult path and come through it with her marriage intact. After dinner, as they walked to the car, Adrian pulled Elena close. "I should have done this years ago," he said. "Included you in this part of my life. Introduced you to people like Dmitri and Svetlana. Made you feel like you belonged instead of keeping you separate." "We're doing it now," Elena said. "That's what matters." The real turning point came 2 months after Elena had destroyed the divorce papers. Adrian came home on a Tuesday evening with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Not upset, but serious. Purposeful. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Something big." They sat together on the sofa, Bruno immediately claiming the space between them, and Adrian took Elena's hands. "I've been having conversations with the other family heads," he said, "about restructuring how we operate, creating a council system where major decisions are made collectively instead of each boss operating independently. It would mean I'd have less direct control, but also less direct responsibility." Elena listened carefully. "What would that mean for you?" "It would mean I'm no longer the final word on everything," Adrian said. "It would mean other people sharing the burden and the authority. It would mean I could actually step back without everything falling apart." He paused. "The council is meeting in 2 weeks to vote on the proposal. If it passes, my role would change significantly. I'd still be involved, still have influence, but I wouldn't be the person who gets called at 5 in the morning every time there's a crisis. And if it doesn't pass? Elena asked. Then I'll have to decide how important this actually is to me, Adrian said honestly. Whether I'm willing to maintain the status quo or whether I'm ready to make a more drastic change. Elena studied his face. What kind of drastic change? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but serious. My father built this empire, and I've spent my entire adult life maintaining it. But I need to ask myself if that's actually what I want, or if I'm just doing it because I think I'm supposed to, because it's expected, because walking away would feel like failing him. He looked at Elena with complete honesty. I told you that you're my priority now, but if I'm serious about that, I need to be willing to make real sacrifices. Not just clearing my calendar or coming home for dinner, but actually restructuring my life in a fundamental way. Are you saying you want to leave? Elena asked carefully. Walk away from everything your father built? I'm saying I want us to decide together what our life should look like, Adrian said. Maybe that means I stay involved, but in a smaller capacity. Maybe it means I transition out over the next few years. Maybe it means something I haven't thought of yet, but I don't want to make those decisions alone anymore. This is our life, Elena. Both of us. We should be building it together. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. This was more than she had expected, more than she had even thought to ask for. I don't want you to resent me, she said quietly. I don't want you to look back in 10 years and blame me for making you give up your father's legacy. Well, my father's legacy was dying alone in his office because he never learned how to let anyone in, Adrian said bluntly. That's not a legacy I want to continue. I want to build something different, Elena. Something that includes you, that includes the possibility of a real life together. He pulled her close. The council vote is in 2 weeks. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm committed to finding a way forward that works for both of us, even if it means making choices my father never would have made. The 2 weeks before the council meeting were tense. Adrian spent long hours in negotiations with the other family heads, building support for his proposal. Elena watched him navigate the complex politics of his world with skill and determination, but she also saw the toll it took. One night, she found him in his office at 2 in the morning, staring at spreadsheets and organizational charts. Come to bed, she said softly. I'm almost done, Adrian said, not looking up. Elena walked over and closed his laptop. No, you're done now. Whatever you haven't figured out will still be there tomorrow. Adrian looked up at her, exhaustion written across his face. What if the vote doesn't go my way? What if they refuse to change the structure? Then we'll figure out plan B, Elena said firmly, together. But right now you need sleep. She pulled him to his feet and led him to their bedroom. As they lay in the dark, Adrian's hand found hers. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. I've spent my whole life being the person in control, the one with all the answers. I don't know how to be anything else. You're learning, Elena said. That's all any of us can do. Learn and try and mess up and try again. What if I mess up with us? Adrian asked. What if I slip back into old patterns? Then I'll tell you, Elena said, and you'll course correct. We've established that pattern now, Adrian. You don't get to use fear as an excuse to stop trying. Adrian pulled her closer. How did I get lucky enough to marry someone so stubborn? You didn't marry me because I was easy, Elena said. You married me because I saw you, the real you, under all the armor and control. And I'm not going anywhere. The night of the council vote, Elena insisted on going with Adrian. He initially protested, saying it wasn't safe, that these meetings could get heated, that she didn't need to see that side of his world. I'm going, Elena said firmly. You're asking these men to fundamentally change how they operate. I want them to see that you're serious, that you have something worth changing for. The meeting was held in a private room at an upscale restaurant that the families collectively owned. Elena sat in an adjacent room with Svetlana and 2 other wives, able to hear the proceedings but not directly involved. She listened as Adrian presented his proposal with calm authority. A rotating council leadership, collective decision-making on major issues, delegation of day-to-day operations to trusted lieutenants, the creation of a structure that didn't require any single person to sacrifice their entire life to maintain. There was pushback, of course. Viktor Kozlov argued that the old ways had worked for decades and shouldn't be changed. Another family head, Anton Marchenko, worried about divided authority leading to weakness. But Adrian was persuasive. He talked about sustainability, about burnout, about the next generation, and whether they wanted their sons to inherit the same crushing burden. He talked about Marcus Volkov dying at his desk, alone and exhausted, and asked whether that was really the legacy they wanted to leave. And then he said something that made Elena's heart stop. "I love my father's memory," Adrian said, his voice carrying through the door. "But I love my wife more. I love the possibility of a life that includes more than just work and obligation and constant vigilance. If this council won't support that, then I'll have to make difficult choices about my future involvement. But I'm done sacrificing everything that makes life worth living in the name of tradition." There was a long silence. Then Dmitri spoke up. "I vote yes. The proposal makes sense, and Adrian is right. We can't sustain this model forever." One by one, the other heads voted. When it was Viktor Kozlov's turn, he was quiet for so long that Elena thought he would refuse. Finally, he said, "My wife left me 15 years ago because I was never home. I haven't seen my daughter in a decade. If this young fool is smart enough to learn from my mistakes, then who am I to stop him? I vote yes." The proposal passed unanimously. Elena heard the room erupt in conversation, heard Adrian's voice thick with emotion as he thanked the council. Svetlana grabbed her hand and squeezed. "He did it," she said. "That stubborn man actually did it." When Adrian emerged from the meeting, he looked drained but triumphant. He found Elena immediately, pulled her into his arms, and held her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." The restructuring took months to implement. Adrian worked with Dmitri to train new leadership, to delegate responsibilities, to build systems that didn't require his constant oversight. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he struggled to let go of control, when old habits tried to reassert themselves. But every time he slipped, Elena was there to remind him why he had made this choice. 4 months after the council vote, Adrian came home at 3 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Elena was in her studio, working on a commissioned piece, her first. A local gallery had seen her work and asked if she'd be interested in creating something for their collection. She was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. "You're home early," she said, looking up from her canvas. "I'm done for the day," Adrian said, leaning against the doorframe. "All my meetings are finished, all the urgent decisions are made, and I realized I could either sit in my office finding busy work or I could come home to my wife." He smiled. "So here I am." Elena set down her brush. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," Adrian said. "What do normal people do on Wednesday afternoons?" Elena laughed. "I have no idea. We're going to have to figure it out together." They ended up taking Bruno to the lake property. Construction had started on the house, a modest, beautiful structure that would blend into the landscape rather than dominate it. They walked the trails around the property, talking about design choices and garden plans and the possibility of getting chickens. "Chickens," Adrian said with amusement. "A year ago, I was negotiating territory disputes with the Bratva. Now I'm planning a chicken coop." "Do you regret it?" Elena asked quietly. Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her. "Elena, I spent 7 years building an empire and losing you in the process. I spent every day terrified that I was becoming my father, powerful and alone and unable to connect with anyone. And then you almost left, and I finally understood that none of it mattered if I didn't have you." He took her hands. "So no, I don't regret chickens or coming home early or any of the choices I've made since the day you told me you filed for divorce. Because those choices gave me back the only thing that ever really mattered." Elena felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm so proud of you, of the work you've done, of the changes you've made." "I'm proud of us," Adrian corrected, "because you didn't just wait for me to change. You demanded it. You set boundaries. You were willing to walk away if I couldn't meet you halfway. That's what saved us, Elena. Your strength, your refusal to accept less than what you deserved." That evening, they returned to the penthouse to find a package waiting at the door. Elena opened it to find the painting Adrian had made in her art class, now professionally framed. "I kept it at the office for months," Adrian said. "But I think it belongs here." A reminder that I'm willing to look foolish if it means being part of your world. Elena hung the terrible sunset painting in the hallway, right next to one of her better watercolors. The contrast was almost comical, her careful, improving technique next to his muddy disaster. But somehow, it was perfect. 6 months after the council vote, Elena and Adrian renewed their vows. Not a big ceremony, just close friends and family gathered at the lake house, which was now complete. Rachel flew in from Boston with her husband and kids. Svetlana and Dmitri were there, along with a handful of other people who had supported them through the hard work of rebuilding. They stood by the water at sunset, the place where Adrian had once told Elena he had bought this land but been too afraid to build on it. Now the house stood behind them, solid and real, a testament to what was possible when two people chose to actually build a life together. Elena wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers. Adrian wore a suit but no tie, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. The ceremony was brief, no elaborate vows or lengthy speeches, just simple promises that acknowledged both the past and the future. "I promise to show up," Adrian said, his voice steady but emotional. "Not just physically, but with all of me, present and engaged and choosing you every single day." "I promise to hold you accountable," Elena said. "To speak up when something isn't working, to demand the love and respect I deserve instead of suffering in silence." They exchanged new rings, simple bands engraved with the date they had almost lost each other, a reminder that their marriage had survived not because it was perfect, but because they had been willing to fight for it. When they kissed, their friends applauded, and Bruno barked from where he was lying in the grass. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. The reception was casual, a barbecue by the lake, music from Adrian's record collection playing through outdoor speakers, children running around while adults talked and laughed and celebrated not just a marriage, but the hard work of keeping it alive. At one point, Elena found herself standing with Rachel, watching Adrian show Dimitri's teenage son how to start a fire in the outdoor pit. "I wasn't sure you two would make it," Rachel admitted. "When you told me you were trying to work things out, I was terrified you were setting yourself up for more pain." "I was terrified too," Elena said honestly. "But Adrian didn't just promise to change, he actually did the work, the uncomfortable, unglamorous work of restructuring his entire life. And you did the work of learning to ask for what you need," Rachel said. "That's not easy either." Elena nodded. "We're still figuring it out. There are still hard days, but they're hard days we face together now, instead of in isolation." As the sun set over the lake, Adrian found Elena and pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor. They swayed together to an old Russian love song, surrounded by people who had witnessed their struggle and their triumph. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked softly. "I'm thinking about the receptionist," Elena said. "About needing an appointment to see you. About how broken we were and how close we came to giving up." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "And I'm thinking about how sometimes things have to break completely before we can rebuild them the right way," Elena said. "We tried to maintain a marriage that wasn't working. We tried to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. It took almost losing each other to finally be honest about what we needed." She pulled back to look at him. "I don't regret the pain, Adrian, because it led us here, to this moment, to a marriage that's actually real instead of just existing on paper." "I love you," Adrian said simply. "Not the idea of you, not the memory of who we were, but you, Elena, exactly as you are. The woman who takes terrible watercolor classes and volunteers at animal shelters and refuses to accept less than she deserves." "I love you too," Elena said. "The man who learned to delegate and come home for dinner and build chicken coops. The man who chose me over his empire." They danced until the stars came out, and then they sat by the fire with their friends, and Bruno snored at their feet, and Elena felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. This was what she had been fighting for. Not perfection, not a life without struggle, but partnership, presence, two people choosing each other day after day in all the small moments that actually mattered. That night, after their guests had left and the house was quiet, Adrian and Elena stood on the deck looking out at the lake. The water reflected the moonlight like scattered diamonds, and the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. "I built this for you," Adrian said quietly. "This house, this life, this possibility of something better than what we had." We built it, Elena corrected. Together. That's the difference, Adrian. You didn't save our marriage by yourself. We saved it by finally learning to be partners. Adrian pulled her close, and they stood there in the darkness. Two people who had been married for 7 years and had almost thrown it all away. Two people who had found their way back to each other through honesty and hard work and the stubborn refusal to give up. Do you remember what you wrote in that journal? Adrian asked. The one from our first year of marriage? Which part? You wrote that you could live in the small moments forever, Adrian said. The coffee in bed, the quiet mornings, the simple act of being seen by someone who loves you. Elena nodded, remembering. I want to give you a lifetime of those moments, Adrian said. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, just the steady accumulation of days where I show up and choose you and prove that you matter more than anything else. You already are, Elena whispered. And it was true. In the months since Elena had almost walked away, Adrian had proven that change was possible. Not easy, not instant, but possible through consistent effort and genuine commitment. He came home for dinner. He asked about her day. He attended her art shows and adoption events and supported her dreams even when they had nothing to do with his world. He learned to delegate and trust and accept that he didn't have to carry everything alone. And Elena had learned to speak up, to set boundaries, to demand the partnership she deserved instead of suffering in silence and hoping things would magically improve. They had both changed, both grown, both become better versions of themselves through the difficult process of actually working on their marriage instead of just maintaining it. Standing on the deck of the house they had built together, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the life they were creating, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Complete peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because they would never struggle or disagree or have hard days ahead, but because she finally believed in them, in their ability to face those challenges together, in Adrian's commitment to choosing her, day after day, in all the small and unglamorous ways that actually mattered. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For fighting for us, Elena said. For being willing to change. For proving that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every single day. Adrian turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I'm the one who should be thanking you, he said, for not giving up, for demanding better, for loving me enough to call me on my failures instead of just accepting them. You saved us, Elena, by refusing to settle for less than what we both deserved. They kissed in the moonlight, and it felt like both an ending and a beginning. The end of the lonely years, the silent suffering, the slow dissolution of everything they had built, and the beginning of something new, a marriage built not on promises and potential, but on proven commitment and genuine partnership. As they walked back into their house, their real home, built on honest foundation rather than expensive emptiness, Bruno greeted them with enthusiastic tail wags. They made tea and sat together on the sofa, talking about plans for the garden and whether they should really get those chickens and what color to paint the guest bedroom. Ordinary conversations, simple moments, the kind of quiet domesticity that Elena had been starving for during all those years when Adrian was physically present but emotionally absent. This was what marriage was supposed to be. Not just the big romantic gestures or the dramatic moments of crisis and resolution, but the steady, unremarkable accumulation of days spent choosing each other, of showing up, of being present. Later, as they got ready for bed in the house by the lake, Elena caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different than she had 7 months ago, when she had stood in that marble lobby clutching a homemade lunch and realizing she needed an appointment to see her own husband. The sadness was gone from her eyes, the hollowness, the resignation. In its place was something stronger, contentment, confidence, the quiet satisfaction of someone who had fought for what she deserved and won. Adrian appeared behind her in the mirror, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking about that receptionist, Elena said with a small smile. About how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to understand, Adrian said quietly. I'm not, Elena said, surprising herself with the honesty. Because if it hadn't gotten that bad, we might have kept pretending everything was fine. We might have maintained a hollow marriage for another 7 years. Sometimes things have to break completely before we can rebuild them the right way. She turned in his arms to face him. We have something real now, Adrian. Not perfect, but real. Built on honesty and effort, and two people who finally understand that love is a verb. I choose you, Adrian said softly. Every day, every moment, for the rest of my life. I choose you too, Elena replied, and as they climbed into bed in their house by the lake, with Bruno snoring contentedly in the corner and the moonlight streaming through the windows, Elena realized something profound. She had married Adrian Volkov 7 years ago in a ceremony full of hope and promise and naive optimism. But she had really married him tonight, in the quiet commitment to keep choosing each other, in the hard work they had done to rebuild what was broken, in the understanding that true partnership required both people to show up every single day. This marriage, the real one, built on honest foundation rather than romantic fantasy, was worth every painful moment it had taken to create it. And as Elena drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she felt grateful not for a perfect love story, but for an honest one. A story about two imperfect people who learned to choose each other even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Because that, she had finally learned, was what real love looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the commitment to struggle together. Not the promise of perfection, but the daily choice to keep showing up and trying and building something worth keeping. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.